My sister stood at the front of the fellowship hall in a navy dress that still had the store crease in the sleeves and told a room full of casseroles, church perfume, and folded hands that our mother had gone peacefully because she was never alone. Then she put her hand on her chest and started crying at exactly the point in the sentence where everyone would look at her with tenderness. I was 10 feet away, balancing a fresh tray of ham rolls near the kitchen door, and my father leaned toward me and said, without even looking up, "Keep the coffee filled, Nora. Let Kelsey handle the family." That was the first sentence anybody in my family said to me after my mother's memorial service. Not hello, not are you holding up, not thank you for the 11 months you spent sleeping on a folding cot beside Mom's hospital bed in the den because she got scared if she woke up alone. Just keep the coffee filled. Let Kelsey handle the family. I remember staring at his profile and thinking how strange it is that a person can bury his wife in the morning and still have enough energy left to put one daughter in the center of the room and the other one by the percolators. People kept coming up to Kelsey with damp eyes and squeezing her forearm. "Your mother was lucky to have you. You were such a rock. The way you cared for June, honey, everybody saw it." I stood there with powdered creamer dust on my fingers and listened to them build a story on top of me like I wasn't even in the room. At one point, Mrs. Abernathy from church asked if I could bring out more lemon bars. She asked in that soft tone people use with staff at catered events. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because if I didn't laugh, I was going to do something worse. The ugliest part is that none of this started at the memorial. By then, it was just polished enough to be public. It started the day my mother had her second stroke, and my sister called me in Columbus and said, "I need you to come home for a couple weeks. Dad's useless, and I can't do this by myself." I had a lease, a decent job managing front desk operations at a hotel near the airport, and a boyfriend I already knew I was going to leave because he liked me best when I was convenient. I packed for 10 days. That was in March. By April, I was living back in my childhood bedroom with 2 pairs of jeans, 1 phone charger, and a rotating schedule of medications taped to the refrigerator in my own handwriting. My mother came home from rehab weaker than anybody wanted to admit. Her right side dragged. Her speech came and went. She hated being helped to the bathroom, and hated even more that I was the one doing it. Not because it was me, but because I was the daughter who had once left town. And apparently, daughters like that are not supposed to be the ones wiping your skin and buttoning your nightgown. Kelsey came by in nice boots with smoothies and cheerful voices for the physical therapist. She took photos of Mom in the backyard blanket chair when the sunlight was good. She captioned one of them, "Making the most of every day with my girl." Then she'd hand me the pill organizer and leave before sundown. The thing Kelsey understood better than anyone in our family was timing. She never missed a moment that could be seen. She was there when Pastor Neil came to pray over Mom in the living room. She was there when neighbors dropped off lasagna. She was there when Dad's brothers visited from Toledo and needed to be told that we're doing everything we can. But she was not there when Mom had an accident at 2:14 in the morning and cried from embarrassment while I changed the sheets in the dark so Dad wouldn't wake up angry. She was not there when I had to crush half a tablet into pudding because Mom couldn't swallow well that day. She was not there when hospice first used the phrase comfort care, and my father went out to the garage and stayed there for an hour because hearing it out loud made him mean. What she did do was narrate. She told people I had moved back because things didn't work out in Columbus. She told my aunts I was in a rough spot and needed structure. She told church friends she was grateful I could help with the practical stuff, while she handled the hard emotional part. Once, in our parents' kitchen, She said it right to my face while she was sorting sympathy cards for someone else's funeral, and I was rinsing out Mom's basin from a sponge bath. "You're good with the ugly parts," she said. "Not everybody is." I still remember the dishwater going cold around my wrist. I told myself she meant it as a compliment. That was the lie I lived inside for most of that year. That if I kept doing the ugly parts quietly, the room would eventually correct itself. It didn't. It got worse in exactly the normal, believable ways that make you doubt your own anger. Dad started introducing me to people as back home for a while, like I was some sad suitcase he hadn't figured out where to store. Kelsey began handling the church meal calendar even though she wasn't the one home for most of them. If somebody dropped off soup, it was for Kelsey because she's carrying so much. If somebody asked what Mom needed, Kelsey answered before I could open my mouth. I can say now that I should have pushed back sooner. At the time, my mother was declining inch by inch, and every day felt triage-based. If I spent energy defending my role, that was energy I wasn't spending on her. So I kept swallowing it. I kept heating towels in the dryer for Mom's shoulders. I kept sleeping in the den. I kept telling myself that my mother knew. And honestly, I thought that had to count for something. After the memorial service, when the room loosened into low voices and paper plates, I went into the coat room to get more napkins from the supply cabinet because of course I did. Kelsey was in there with Mom's old silver flip phone in her hand. Not her smartphone from the last few years. The older one. The one Mom kept in the side pocket of her cardigan because she said it was easier to hold when her hands shook. Kelsey snapped it shut the second she saw me. "I'm taking this," she said, like she was claiming a casserole dish. "It's personal." I don't know what showed on my face, but she narrowed her eyes and tucked the phone into her purse. "Don't start something today," she said. Then she walked past me back into the hall where everybody still believed she had been the one sitting beside our mother at night. I stood there with a stack of napkins in my arms and the old metal cabinet humming behind me, and for the first time all day, I felt something sharper than grief. Because that phone wasn't just another thing of Mom's. It was the one object in the house I had never seen Kelsey touch. And if she suddenly wanted it that badly, there was a reason. I didn't chase her into the hall and grab the purse. 5 years ago, I might have. Even 2 years ago, maybe. But grief does strange things to your timing. It can make you wild, or it can make you very, very still. I stood there in the coat room with the napkins cutting into my forearm and heard the fellowship hall absorb her again. A few seconds later, there was a ripple of soft laughter, then somebody saying, "Kelsey, honey, sit down for once." I went back out with the napkins because people were still eating and because my mother would have hated a scene in church. That was another lie I had wrapped around myself so tightly it felt like character by then. Mom would hate a scene. Mom would want peace. Mom would want us to keep this day dignified. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was just the family language for, don't make the comfortable people uncomfortable. The truth is, my mother and I had stopped talking like mother and daughter somewhere around month 4 of her illness. Not emotionally, I mean practically. Our conversations became built out of body parts, timing, and fear. "Can you help me turn? I think I missed a pill. Don't let your father hear me throwing up. Is it daytime? Can you stay until I fall asleep?" Intimacy got stripped down to function. There is nothing glamorous about end-of-life care at home. It is towels and plastic gloves and the smell of crushed medication and that dry heat old houses get when the thermostat is too high because one person is cold all the time. I knew exactly how many steps it took to get from the den cot to my mother's recliner in the dark without stubbing my toe. I knew how to brace her elbow when her knees buckled. I knew the sound she made when pain was coming before she admitted it was there. Kelsey knew which cardigan made Mom look less sick in pictures. That sounds bitter. It is bitter. It's also true. There were moments, though, that kept me from blowing the whole thing open sooner. Mom had enough clear days to make me doubt myself. On better afternoons, she would reach for my hand and say, "Your sister means well." Sometimes she'd say, "Don't fight in front of your father. He can't take one more thing." Once, when I was changing the sheets and crying so quietly I thought she hadn't noticed, she touched my wrist and whispered, "I see you." I held on to those 3 words like a fool, not because they solved anything, because they were all I had. Dad wasn't cruel in the loud movie way. He was worse for me than that. He was selectively blind. The version of reality that cost him the least was always the one he chose. If Kelsey said she had spent the afternoon going over Mom's insurance stuff, he accepted it, even if I had been the one on hold for 90 minutes with a billing office while stirring soup with my free hand. If I looked exhausted, he got irritated, like fatigue itself was accusatory. "No one told you to take all this on," he said to me once after I snapped at him for leaving Mom alone while he went for a haircut. It was such a perfect sentence for our family that I actually wrote it down later on the back of a grocery receipt. No one told you to take all this on. As if things just magically got done by whoever was weak enough to keep doing them. The first real crack came in July, long before the funeral, and of course it came through something small and practical. Mom had begun getting a modest monthly caregiver support payment through a county aging program. It wasn't much, but it covered supplies, extra pads, the better skin cream, gas for appointments. The social worker had explained it to all of us at the dining room table. The payment would go to the designated family contact handling care logistics. Kelsey jumped in before the woman finished her sentence. "I can coordinate that," she said, already smiling in that warm, competent way of hers. "Nora's doing so much hands-on stuff. I'll take paperwork off her plate." At the time, I was too tired to argue. That was the pattern with Kelsey. She always volunteered for the cleaner half of control. So the checks went to her. At first, she reimbursed things, mostly. Then slowly the lag started. She forgot. She was busy. She had to move money around. One week, I used my debit card for Mom's incontinence supplies and texted her a photo of the receipt. 2 days passed, then 5, then 9. When I asked again, she sent back, "Relax, I'm not stealing from a dying woman." The sentence bothered me immediately, not because of what it denied, but because I had never used the word stealing. You don't defend against the accusation that was made. You defend against the one that's true enough to scare you. After that, I started noticing all the small mismatches I had been too underwater to track. A church meal gift card Kelsey said she used on groceries that never appeared in the kitchen. A pharmacy pickup she swore she'd handled when the medication was still waiting in the bin. A package of disposable bed pads that Marlene from next door dropped off because, as she put it, Kelsey said money was tight again. Tight again. That phrase lodged in me. Money was tight for whom? I was the one buying half this stuff while my savings shrank into something scary. Marlene stood in the side doorway, sunglasses pushed up on her head, casserole dish in hand, and looked past me toward the den where my mother was sleeping. "Honey," she asked quietly, "are you getting any help at all?" I did what I always did back then. I smiled too fast and made it sound manageable. Marlene didn't look convinced. She squeezed my arm the way older women do when they've already figured out more than you've said. "Keep records," she told me, low enough that Dad couldn't hear from the kitchen. "That's all I'm saying. Just keep records. That night, after everybody else had gone to bed, I pulled an old spiral notebook from the junk drawer and started writing down everything. Medications, pickups, check dates, grocery runs, who stayed overnight, who left early, what Mom needed, what was said. I told myself I was doing it because caregiving makes your brain slippery, and I didn't want to forget dosages or appointments. That was partly true. The other part was harder to admit. Somewhere under the exhaustion, I had started to understand that if I ever wanted out of the role my family had handed me, memory alone wasn't going to be enough. And when I went to check on Mom before trying to sleep, I found her half awake with her old silver flip phone open in her lap, the little screen glowing blue against the blanket. She looked up at me like a child caught doing something private and said, very softly, "I was trying to save something before your sister deletes it." I froze with one hand on the den doorway. Mom had the phone open in both hands, thumbs clumsy from the weakness on her right side, the blue light making her face look even thinner. "What do you mean, deletes it?" I asked. She looked toward the hall before answering, not because Kelsey was there, but because by then, all of us had gotten used to checking where Kelsey was before saying anything that mattered. Mom swallowed and shifted against the pillows. Voicemails. Notes. I don't know. "She was in here last week messing with it." Her voice had that tired, frayed sound it got at night, like every word had to be lifted over something heavy. "She said I was out of storage and she was cleaning it up." Then she looked at me in a way that made me feel about 9 years old again, guilty for something I hadn't done. I asked her not to. I sat on the ottoman and took the phone from her carefully. It was one of those old silver flip models with rubbery buttons and a scratched outer screen. Nothing special. The kind of phone people keep in kitchen drawers after they upgrade. But my mother liked it because the speaker was loud and the menu was simple, and because once her hand started trembling, the newer glass touchscreen made her feel stupid. I checked the saved messages first. There were only 4. That alone was wrong. My mother saved voicemails the way other women saved recipes. Short things, reminders. People saying they loved her. A weather alert from some winter 3 years earlier that she thought sounded dramatic and funny. There should have been dozens. I opened the notes app she barely knew how to use. Empty. "Did you see her doing it?" I asked. Mom shook her head once. I fell asleep. Then, after a second, she added, "She gets that look on her face when she thinks she's fixing something." It was such a plain sentence. That was my mother all over. Even near the end, she was still trying to make ugly behavior sound respectable. I took the phone into the kitchen and plugged it in behind the toaster so it would charge overnight. Then I got my notebook and wrote down the date, the time, and exactly what Mom had said. July 18th, 11:42 p.m. Mom believes Kelsey deleted messages/notes from Silver flip phone after saying she was cleaning it up. I remember writing it very neatly, like neatness could keep me calm. Then I sat there at the table longer than I needed to, staring at the refrigerator calendar with all my handwriting on it. Dose changes, bath days, hospice nurse Thursday, pastor visit canceled. Kelsey had almost nothing on that fridge in her handwriting. A smiley face once. Soup in freezer. That was about it. And still, if you had asked 10 people from church who was carrying my mother through that summer, 9 of them would have said Kelsey without hesitation. Not because they were evil, because she had gotten there first with the prettier version. The next afternoon, I brought the phone to Marlene because Marlene's son fixed copier machines and phones and all kinds of random electronics, and she was the sort of woman who either knew how to do something or knew exactly who did. She lived next door in a ranch house that always smelled faintly like cinnamon and furniture polish. She took one look at my face and didn't make me explain twice. "Sit," she said, already pulling her reading glasses down from the top of her head. "Tell me the honest version, not the family version." That line almost made me cry on the spot. I sat at her kitchen table while she pressed buttons and frowned at the tiny screen. I told her about the caregiver checks, about the gift cards, about how Kelsey somehow always ended up holding the official pieces while I held the actual body of the work. I even told her about the sentence in the fellowship hall earlier that day. Keep the coffee filled. Though that part hadn't happened yet in the timeline then. No, sorry. That's me circling because the memory of that room is still stuck to everything. Back then, it was just July. Just heat. Just my mother asleep in the next house and me feeling vaguely crazy. Marlene called her son, had him talk her through a backup process over speakerphone, and 20 minutes later she leaned back in her chair and went quiet in a way that made my skin prickle. "Well," she said finally, "your sister didn't clean this thing up. She scrubbed it." There had been more files recently deleted than I ever would have guessed Mom knew how to create. Audio notes, voicemails, contact entries. Nothing dramatic, nothing Hollywood, just enough to change what the phone could later prove. Some of it was recoverable, not all. My stomach dropped so hard I actually pressed my palm against it. "Can you tell what they were?" I asked. Marlene shook her head. "Some. Not by title, mostly by timestamps. But Nora, listen to me." She took off her glasses. "People don't erase random things from a dying woman's phone unless they're scared of what those things say." I sat there with my hands between my knees like a child waiting for bad news. Marlene lowered her voice. "Do you want me to tell your father?" I answered too fast. "No, not yet. Because the truth was, I already knew what would happen if I went to Dad with anything less than a full, impossible package, sealed with a witness and maybe God's own signature. He would say there was probably an explanation. He would say stress makes people paranoid. He would ask why I was looking for trouble while my mother was still alive. That night, Kelsey stopped by around 6 with iced coffees and a bag of peaches she made sure to set where Dad could see them. Mom was having a decent day, awake and brushed and sitting up in the recliner in a pink cardigan. Kelsey bent down and kissed her forehead for a beat longer than natural, then turned to me and said brightly, "I heard from the county office. Another caregiver check should be coming next week, so don't worry." Don't worry. That phrase from a person who isn't carrying the thing is one of the most insulting sounds in the world. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and said, as evenly as I could, "Good. Then you can pay me back for the pharmacy run, the pads, and the overnight meds from last week." Dad was in the room. That was the first reason I said it out loud. The second reason was I was tired of acting like we were having private misunderstandings instead of a long public theft of labor. Kelsey's smile didn't fully crack, but it changed shape. "I told you, I'm juggling it." "With what?" I asked. Too quick, too sharp. Mom looked between us. Dad's head came up from his chair. Kelsey gave a little laugh for the room. "Can we not do this in front of Mom?" There it was. The family escape hatch. Don't do this here. Don't do this now. Don't do this while somebody else might have to notice. I almost backed down. I would have, probably, if Mom hadn't spoken first. Her voice was rough but clear. "Pay your sister back." All three of us turned toward her. Kelsey blinked. Dad stared. Mom kept looking at Kelsey the way you look at a nurse who has brought the wrong medicine. "Nora buys things," she said. "Nora stays." It wasn't a speech. It was barely 6 words strung together, but it changed the oxygen in the room. Kelsey recovered first. She knelt beside Mom and took her hand and said, so gently it made my skin crawl, "We all stay, Mom. We all help." My mother closed her eyes, not because she agreed, because she was tired. And that was when I understood something I should have understood months earlier. Kelsey was not just taking credit. She was actively competing with a dying woman's memory. That was the night I stopped hoping the room would correct itself. By August, my mother's decline had its own rhythm. Good mornings, bad afternoons, nights that felt built to test how much a human body could do before it started moving on resentment alone. Hospice had started coming regularly by then. Not full-time, just enough to teach, assess, adjust, and leave me with more knowledge than comfort. That's when Denise entered the picture. Denise was one of those hospice aides who could walk into a room, smell the air, glance at a bedsore dressing, and know exactly how honest the family had been with themselves that week. She was compact, calm, and impossible to impress. The first time she came, she looked past my father trying to sound in control, past Kelsey explaining everybody's shared responsibilities, and asked one simple question. "Who's here overnight?" Nobody answered for half a second. Then Kelsey smiled and said, "We all rotate." Denise didn't even look at her. She looked straight at me, at the cot in the den, at the hoodie draped over the chair, at the half-finished mug of coffee on the side table. "That's not what I asked," she said. I remember feeling embarrassed by how relieved I was. After that, Denise became the first person in that whole year who consistently spoke to me like the work I was doing was real. Not noble, not saintly, real. She showed me how to reposition Mom without pulling on her shoulder. She taught me which little skin changes meant trouble was starting. Once, while washing her hands at our kitchen sink, she asked me how long I'd been doing most of this alone. I said, "It's not just me." She dried her hands, looked at me in the window reflection, and said, "That wasn't my question either." That was Denise. No speeches, just a refusal to help people lie comfortably. I still didn't tell her everything. I wasn't ready to hear it out loud from somebody outside the family. But she saw enough on her own. She saw Kelsey arrive right as visiting hours with church people or relatives somehow lined up. She saw her touch Mom's blanket, smooth Mom's hair, say, "I've been so worried about you," then disappear right before toileting, meds, or the long, restless evenings. And she saw the effect it had on me. The way I spoke faster when Kelsey was around, the way I automatically minimized my own hours if anyone asked. The bigger reframe came on a Thursday that should have been boring. Denise had left, Mom was asleep, Dad was at the hardware store buying things we didn't need because he couldn't stand being in a quiet house anymore. Kelsey texted me from the driveway. "Coming in, need to grab the county form." I didn't even know there was a county form. She came through the side door in sunglasses and heels that made no sense for a caregiving house, went straight to the drawer by the microwave, and started flipping through papers like she lived there more than I did. "What form?" I asked. She didn't answer at first. Then she found a manila envelope, slid a sheet out, and tried to fold it against her purse. I caught the top line before she turned it over. "Caregiver stipend renewal." My chest went hot. "Why is that here?" I asked. Kelsey's face barely changed. "Because I handle it." I held out my hand. "Let me see it." She laughed once, short, annoyed. "Nora, don't. I'm already dealing with enough." It was such a clean summary of our whole family dynamic, I almost missed what mattered. On the second page, clipped behind the form, was a log sheet with handwritten hours. Her hours, not mine. 3 overnight blocks listed under Kelsey's name for the previous month. 2 full-day care entries I knew for a fact she had not worked, because one of those days she'd been posting brunch photos in Cincinnati. I took the paper from her before I even fully decided to. She jerked it back. We had one ugly, silent second there in the kitchen, both of us gripping the same form, like 2 women fighting over a family story they both understood was worth money. "You billed hours?" I asked, and my voice sounded strange even to me. Not loud, flattened. Kelsey finally dropped the competent sister face. "You think I don't do anything?" she snapped. "You think showing up doesn't count because you like martyring yourself with the gross stuff?" Gross stuff. There it was again. The labor itself, the body of it, something she could step around while still claiming the title. I said, "You claimed nights you were never here." She rolled her eyes in a way that took me right back to being 16 and wrong by default in our mother's kitchen. "I coordinate everything. Do you understand how much emotional labor I do with Dad? With church people? With the family? Somebody has to keep this from looking like a train wreck." That was the moment the whole thing changed shape for me. Up to then, I had still been telling myself Kelsey was selfish, maybe jealous, maybe addicted to attention, but basically improvising. Standing in that kitchen with that log sheet between us, I realized she wasn't improvising anything. She had built a full moral system where the visible story counted more than the physical truth. In her version, my labor only existed to support her narrative. I handled the ugly parts. She handled the family. She wasn't just taking credit after the fact. She was converting my work into her identity in real time, and she had been for months, maybe longer. Worse than that, she believed it. You could hear it in the way she said looking like a train wreck, like our mother's dying body was one problem and the family's image was another, equally important one. I wish I could say I blew it open right then. I didn't. Dad came in through the garage before I could decide whether to throw the form at him or make a copy first. Kelsey switched masks so fast it would have impressed me if I hadn't hated her. By the time he stepped into the kitchen, she was dabbing at her eyes and saying, "I'm trying to keep up with all this paperwork, and Nora is acting like I'm the enemy." Dad looked from her to me, saw me holding a county form I couldn't yet explain without sounding frantic, and chose the easiest path the way he always did. "Not now," he said to me. "Not what's going on. Not let me see that. Just not now." Then he took the envelope from my hand and gave it back to Kelsey, like he was returning a title deed to its rightful owner. That night, after Kelsey left and Dad fell asleep in his recliner with the TV on mute, I sat on the back steps with the spiral notebook and wrote until my hand cramped. The county form, the false hours, the exact sentence. Somebody has to keep this from looking like a train wreck. Then I heard the screen door open behind me. It was Denise. She had doubled back because she'd left her stethoscope on the den side table. She saw my face, the notebook, the way I snapped it half shut, and she didn't ask if I was okay. She sat beside me on the step and said, "If someone is claiming your care, you need to stop assuming the truth will survive on its own." Then she reached into her scrub pocket, pulled out a folded slip of paper, and handed it to me. "Your mother asked me to write this number down in case you ever needed it. It's the hospice office archive line. Some patients leave recorded care notes. Most families never ask for them." I looked at the number, then at her. Did my mother leave some? Denise stood up slowly and said, "I'm not supposed to discuss patient files on a front porch. I am saying your mother knew who was in the room." I called the hospice archive line from my car 3 days later, with the engine running and the air conditioning too high, because I had learned by then that cold helped me stay practical. A woman named Teresa answered, in a voice so gentle it almost made me hang up. I gave Mom's full name, date of birth, the date hospice began, and then I heard keyboard tapping. There was a pause. I can confirm there are patient-recorded comfort notes attached to her file, she said. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Can I access them? Another pause, longer this time. Your mother authorized release to one family caregiver by name. I already knew the answer before she said it. That authorization lists Nora Bell. I had to press my lips together before I could speak. Not because I was surprised, because after months of being treated like I was making my own life up, hearing my mother name me in an official system nearly undid me. Teresa explained that the recordings were meant for care continuity, not family disputes, and I said, too quickly, I know. I probably sounded guilty. I wasn't guilty. I was desperate. She emailed me the release instructions while I sat there in the Kroger parking lot, staring at a shopping cart rolling loose across the asphalt. I didn't get to listen to them right away because life, or death, kept doing what it does and refusing to wait for anybody's emotional timing. My mother took a hard turn that same week. Less speech, more sleeping. The little clear windows narrowed until whole days went by where the only real communication between us was pressure in the hand. Kelsey got even busier socially as Mom got quieter physically. She started calling church people herself instead of letting updates move naturally. We're in a very tender phase, she said to anyone who would listen, like she was narrating a documentary about our family instead of standing in the middle of it. Dad clung to her version harder the closer we got to the end. I think he needed somebody in the house to look composed and ceremonial, because I no longer did. I looked like what caregiving actually looks like by month 10. Hair tied up badly, knees sore, sweatshirt with medication stains on the sleeve. No softness left for performing. One night, around 2 a.m, when I was adjusting the wedge pillow under Mom's shoulder, she opened her eyes just enough to focus on me and said, very clearly, "Don't let them turn this into her story." Then she was gone again. Not dead, just gone, under the haze of pain medication and exhaustion. I stood there with my hand still on the pillow and felt the room change around me. It was the closest thing to instructions I was ever going to get. My mother died on a Monday just before dawn, with rain tapping against the den windows and the television on mute, because she liked the moving light. I was there. Denise was there. Dad was half awake in the recliner when the breathing changed, and Kelsey, who had gone home at 9 because she had an early breakfast meeting, was not. That fact should not have mattered as much as it did. But when the body is still warm, and one daughter was in the room and one daughter wasn't, details like that become moral weight, whether anyone says it out loud or not. Kelsey arrived 40 minutes later in full mascara and a camel-colored coat, and walked into the den crying like she had been cut open on the drive over. Dad folded into her immediately. That was the moment I knew the next phase of this would be worse. Death doesn't fix a family story. It hardens it. By noon, she had a legal pad out and was talking about obituary language, flower preferences, who should speak at the service. I was bagging medications for disposal because Denise had told me not to leave them where grief could turn reckless. At one point, Kelsey asked, "Do you think the blue dress photo or the garden bench photo captures Mom better?" I was standing at the sink, rinsing out the last of the mouth swabs, and I almost said, "Neither." The one that captures her best is the one where she's gripping the side rail at 3 a.m., asking if I'm still there. But of course, there was no photo of that. Nobody had taken one. Nobody ever photographs the daughter doing the actual staying. The recordings came through the next morning. 4 audio files, each under a minute. I sat on the floor of my old bedroom with earbuds in, while people downstairs argued about deli trays. The first one was mostly practical. Mom's voice thin, tired, answering a hospice prompt about nighttime anxiety. "I sleep better when Nora answers me right away," she said. "She hears me." I had to stop the file and take a breath before going on. The second one was worse, or better, depending on what kind of justice you believe in. The nurse asked who usually handled overnight assistance and medication when symptoms flared. My mother gave one of those little exhausted huffs she did when a question had an obvious answer. "Nora does the nights," she said. "Kelsey visits." Then, after a second, softer, "Kelsey likes to tell things nicely." I sat there with my back against the bed frame and pressed the heel of my hand into my eyes so hard it hurt. It wasn't just proof. It was my mother, in her own voice, naming the exact hierarchy I had been choking on for nearly a year. The third file was fragmented, more pain than coherence, but near the end she said, "My oldest is good at rooms. My youngest is good at staying." That one nearly finished me. Not because it was beautiful, because it was plain. My mother had seen exactly what was happening. She just hadn't had enough strength left to stop it. I should have taken the recordings straight downstairs and put them on the kitchen table in front of my father. I know that. Instead, I made the mistake I had been trained to make my whole life. I waited for a better moment, a calmer moment, a moment with fewer casseroles and fewer witnesses and less chance of my father saying I was making a scene while my mother wasn't even buried yet. By the time the Memorial Day came, Kelsey had turned herself into the grieving face of the family so completely that people were thanking her before they even took off their coats. She spoke during the service. I did not. Dad said she had the right tone for it. Then came the fellowship hall, the ham rolls, the coffee, his voice at my shoulder telling me to keep the coffee filled and let Kelsey handle the family. And then the coat room, the silver flip phone disappearing into her purse. I didn't know yet whether she had guessed what was still recoverable, or if she just couldn't tolerate any loose end with Mom's voice attached to it. But when I came back out holding napkins, Marlene was standing by the dessert table watching Kelsey laugh through her tears, and Denise had just walked in from the parking lot still in scrubs because she had come straight from another patient visit. I looked at both of them, then at Kelsey's purse tucked under her chair, and for the first time that day, I stopped thinking about peace. I started thinking about timing. Kelsey was at the round table by the coat rack when I finally walked over. She had made herself useful in the most visible possible way, gathering sympathy cards into neat stacks, directing people toward leftovers, bending low when older women spoke so they could touch her wrist and call her strong. Mom's silver flip phone was no longer in her purse. It was sitting beside the guest book, under a folded linen napkin, like it had somehow become part of the memorial display. That was such a Kelsey move, I almost admired it. Turn the thing into scenery first. Make it harder for anyone to claim without looking disruptive. I stopped across from her and said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "I want the phone." She didn't even look up right away. She kept sorting cards for another 2 beats, then said, "Not here." I said, "No, here is fine." That got her attention. She lifted her eyes and gave me the look she had used on me since we were kids, the one that suggested I was seconds away from embarrassing myself if I didn't get a grip. "You need to think about Mom for 5 minutes and not whatever spiral you're in," she said. Then, because cruelty always came easiest to her when she could hide it inside reason, she added, "Some of us are trying to make this day bearable." I might still have swallowed it if my father had not come up beside her right then and said, without asking what was happening, "Nora, enough." Enough. Not, "What does she have?" Not, "Why do you want it?" Just the old family verdict, preloaded and ready. Around us, the room kept breathing in that low church basement way. Forks tapping paper plates, chairs shifting on the tile floor, somebody laughing too loudly near the coffee urns because grief makes people misjudge volume. I said, "Dad, that phone was with Mom every day. I'm taking it home." Kelsey let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "Why? So you can keep score from beyond the grave?" That line did what she meant it to do. It made two women near the cookie tray glance over. It made me look harsh before I had even answered. Then she went softer, sadder, for the audience she could feel gathering at the edges. "Nora, you help so much with the practical things. Nobody is denying that. But this is family stuff." Family stuff. She said it standing 3 feet from the woman our mother had actually authorized as her caregiver in a hospice file. Something in me stopped trying to keep the peace right there. I said, louder than I had meant to, "I am family." The room didn't go silent all at once. It narrowed. That's the only way I can describe it. Conversations thinned out. A few people stopped pretending not to listen. My father's face changed first to warning, then to embarrassment, because by then he still thought public discomfort was the worst thing happening in the room. "Don't do this," he said. Kelsey crossed her arms lightly over her waist, the posture of somebody who wanted to look wounded and gracious at the same time. "No," she said, and there was real irritation under it now. "Let's say it plainly. You came back because your life stalled out. I stayed because Mom needed someone who could actually hold this family together." I don't think she planned to say it that nakedly. That was the overreach. That was her getting too comfortable. She had told prettier versions of that sentence for months, but never in front of enough witnesses at once. Marlene was the first person to move. She set down the casserole carrier she'd been carrying to the cleanup table and said, not loudly, but with the kind of voice that lands anyway, "That's not what I saw next door." Kelsey's head snapped toward her. Before she could answer, Denise stepped in from the hallway where she had been standing half out of the room, still in scrubs, car keys in hand. She did not make a dramatic entrance. She just walked to the edge of the circle and said, "It's also not what hospice documented. If you want to know what panic looks like on a person who is used to controlling a room, it is not always shouting. Sometimes it is the exact second their eyes start calculating too fast." Kelsey looked from Denise to me and back again. "Excuse me?" she said, with a little laugh that was all edges now. Denise folded her hands in front of her and kept her tone clinical. "I'm not here to discuss private medical details in a fellowship hall. I am here to say I was in that house 3 times a week for months, and I knew who was there overnight." My father stared at her like she had spoken in another language. "That is not your place," he said. Denise didn't blink. "No, sir. My place was in your den, where your younger daughter was usually awake before I got there." Kelsey tried to recover by doing what she always did when cornered. She turned to my father and made herself smaller. "Dad, this is insane. Nora has been resentful for months. She's twisting everything because she wants—" "I don't have to twist anything," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. My hands were shaking so hard, I tucked one under my opposite elbow to hide it. "Mom answered this already." Then I took out my phone. Kelsey saw it and actually went pale. Not because she knew exactly what was on it, because she knew there was something she had failed to control. "Don't," she said, quick and sharp. That single word did more damage to her than anything I could have said. Too fast, too scared, too revealing. Marlene looked at her, then at me, then away, the way decent people do when they realize they are standing in the middle of a family finally breaking open. I tapped the second audio file because it was the cleanest one. For one awful second, I thought it wouldn't play and I would look insane after all. Then my mother's voice came through the speaker, thin and tired and unmistakably hers. Even the room seemed to recognize it. "Nora does the nights," she said. There was a little rustle in the recording, then her breath. "Kelsey visits. Kelsey likes to tell things nicely." Nobody moved. I don't mean that theatrically. I mean forks actually stopped halfway to mouths. Somebody near the doorway whispered, "Oh my God," to nobody in particular. My father sat down hard in the nearest folding chair, like his knees had simply stepped out of the conversation. Kelsey opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "She was confused," she said finally, and her voice cracked on the word "was." Denise answered before I could. She was not confused during that assessment. I asked who handled overnights. She answered clearly. I played the first clip then, because by that point there was no putting anything back. My mother again, faint but sure. "I sleep better when Nora answers me right away. She hears me." That was the one that broke my father. Not the care logistics, not the exposure. That line. Something about his wife sounding small and tired and relieved by one daughter's presence while he had spent months handing the title to the other one. He covered his mouth with his hand and stared at the floor. Kelsey looked around the room the way people do when they expect somebody, anybody, to help them reassemble authority. No one did. Pastor Neil had come in from the kitchen by then, dish towel still in hand, and he was looking at my sister like he no longer knew where to set his face. Mrs. Abernathy, who had asked me for lemon bars 20 minutes earlier, was crying quietly into a napkin. Not because she suddenly loved me best, because she had realized she had helped build the wrong story, and decent people do feel shame when it arrives clean enough. I walked to the guestbook table, picked up my mother's phone, and put it in my purse. No one stopped me. Kelsey said my name once, but it was the first time all day she had said it without superiority in it, and I did not turn around. I looked at my father instead. He still had not lifted his head. "I'm going home," I said. "Not to punish anybody. I just can't stay here and help serve cake under that version of things." He nodded once without looking up. That hurt more than if he had argued. Because for the first time in months, maybe years, he understood enough to know I was right, and not enough to make it better. When I stepped toward the side exit, Marlene reached for my elbow and squeezed once. Denise opened the door for me. Behind me, in the room where my sister had just spent an hour being thanked for my labor, I heard Kelsey start to cry for real. I did not go back to my parents' house that night. I went to my apartment, put my mother's silver phone on the kitchen counter, and sat on the floor with my back against the cabinets until the sun went down. My sister called 6 times. I declined all 6. My father called once and did not leave a message. Marlene texted me that she was proud of me, which was kind, and also made me cry harder than the recordings had. Denise sent one line. "You did not make the truth ugly. You stopped helping the lie look clean." I read that over and over because it named something I had not had language for. My whole life in that family, I had been trained to think the worst thing a person could do was disrupt the room. Even when the room was built on me. Even when keeping it smooth cost me my place in it. The next morning I made coffee, opened my spiral notebook, and finally listened to the last recording from hospice. Mom sounded weaker in that one, words thinning in and out. But near the end, she said something that went straight through me. Nora always thinks she has to make herself smaller so other people can stay comfortable. Don't let her do that. Then a nurse's voice, soft, asking who she meant, and my mother, after a long pause, saying, "Everybody." It was not elegant. It was not a movie line. It was my mother, sick and tired and still knowing me too well. My father came over 2 days later with my mother's Pyrex dish in his hands, like he needed an excuse to stand on my porch. He looked older in a way that had nothing to do with the funeral. Less defended. That was new. He did not ask to come in until I stepped aside. We sat at my kitchen table, and for a while he just stared at the flip phone charging near the fruit bowl. Then he said, "I listened to what Pastor Neil sent me." Apparently, Marlene had told the pastor there should be no more soft handling of facts, and for once, the church machine had actually been useful. Someone had emailed my father the audio clips and a short note saying the memorial remarks would be corrected in the church newsletter the following week. I hadn't asked for that. I wouldn't have thought to. Dad kept rubbing his thumb along the lip of the casserole dish. "I let Kelsey explain everything because she was easier to listen to," he said finally. "You looked angry all the time, and she looked steady." He stopped there because there was nowhere honest to go from that sentence except straight into shame. I said, "I was angry all the time." He nodded. "I know that now." It wasn't a perfect apology. He never was a perfect man. But then he looked up at me and said the truest thing I had ever heard him say. "I confused being pleasant with being trustworthy, and I made you pay for it." I didn't forgive him on the spot. I didn't hug him. I just sat there with my coffee getting cold between my hands and let the sentence land where it belonged. The fallout with Kelsey was quieter than people imagine when they hear stories like this. No one threw her out of the family. No one staged some dramatic moral trial. Real families usually do damage in softer-looking ways than that, and they repair in softer-looking ways too. But the ground changed under her. Churchwomen who used to call her first started texting me directly when they found my number. Aunt Leslie mailed me a card addressed, for the first time in my life, to Nora Bell, not and family. My father asked to see the county stipend forms in the notebook, and when he did the math on the reimbursements I had never gotten back, he went white and wrote me a check from his own account without arguing once. Kelsey sent a long email to the family saying she had misrepresented the division of care, which was a very Kelsey phrase, still trying to make a wound sound administrative. I did not reply. A week later, she came to my apartment without warning and stood on the landing twisting her car keys until I thought they might snap. She did not cry. That told me more than tears would have. She just said, "I didn't think it would go that far." I believed that. Not because it excused anything, but because it fit her perfectly. She had never needed to ruin me on purpose in one grand gesture. She had only ever needed me to stay useful and quiet while she moved to the front of the room. I told her, "That's the problem. It went exactly as far as it needed to for you." She flinched like I had slapped her, and maybe in a way I had. She asked if we were done. I said, "I don't know yet." That was the most honest answer I had. In the months after, grief stopped looking ceremonial and started looking ordinary. My father called on Tuesdays for no reason except to ask if I had eaten. The first few times it annoyed me, then it didn't. Pastor Neil dropped off the corrected memorial booklet one Sunday afternoon. Same cream paper, same photo of Mom in the garden, but under family it now listed both daughters, and at the bottom there was a simple line thanking the family caregivers who kept June Bell at home. Plural. It was not enough to cover what had happened, but I still ran my thumb over the ink for a long time. I put one copy in my desk drawer with the spiral notebook and the county reimbursement stubs, and kept another on the counter for a week just to see it there. Denise stopped by once on her way home from another patient visit and stood in my kitchen drinking coffee from a chipped mug. Before she left, she touched the phone on the counter and said, "You keeping that?" I said yes. She nodded like that made sense. Because it wasn't about nostalgia. It was about custody of the truth. The last time Kelsey and I spoke, really spoke, was outside my father's house while we were sorting winter coats for donation. She said therapy was making her realize she had spent her whole life performing the version of herself that got love fastest. I leaned against my car and said, "That may be true. It still cost me." She said she knew. This time I believed she meant it. And this time it still wasn't enough to erase anything. Some things don't get erased. They just stop running the house. A few weeks ago, my father invited me over for Sunday breakfast. Nothing ceremonial, just eggs, burnt toast, and the kind of quiet that used to make me feel like furniture, and now felt a little less dangerous. He asked where the plates were kept in my kitchen the last time he came over, then corrected himself and laughed because he realized he was talking like he already planned to come back. That small assumption did more for me than any big apology could have. After breakfast, I helped him clear the table, and when I reached automatically for the coffee cups, he said, "Leave those, I've got them." It was such a tiny sentence, barely anything. But for one strange second, I had to look away because I understood what it was. Not redemption, not balance, just the first ordinary sign that I was no longer the one expected to quietly carry the ugly part while everyone else called it love. Now Mom's old phone sits on the shelf by my kitchen window. I don't listen to the recordings much anymore. I don't need to. The point was never to live inside that proof forever. The point was that her voice got me out of a role I had mistaken for duty. She knew who stayed. I know who stayed. And now, finally, the rest of them do too. If this story stayed with you, I'd really appreciate it if you liked, shared, and subscribed. Stories like this matter because so many people live inside family roles that were assigned to them before they were old enough to question them. And sometimes, hearing one truth told cleanly can help somebody else stop shrinking inside their own life. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Would you have played the recording in that room or waited? Do you think partial repair is enough after something like this? And have you ever been the person doing the real work while someone else got the credit?